Last week, you paced back and forth in the hallway of a private hospital, clutching your father's medical checkup report so tight your fingertips were almost creasing the paper. One index on the report was only slightly outside the normal range, but the attending chief physician frowned and tapped the report sharply with his finger. "We need to do a contrast CT right away to rule out the possibility of a malignant lesion." You instinctively wanted to speak up. Your father has a history of contrast dye allergy, and a doctor had specifically warned you to avoid this kind of test before, but the words got to your lips and you swallowed them back. The Harvard Medical School PhD name tag on his white coat glinted. The office walls were covered with industry awards and thank you flags from patients, and the line of patients waiting outside stretched all the way from the exam room to the elevator. In the end, you still signed the consent form for the test. It wasn't until another young doctor saw the medical record and raised a question that it hit you. Your compliance just now wasn't because you understood or agreed with the medical advice. It was because you'd been pushed along by an invisible force. That force is what psychologists often call the authority-obedience effect. The authority-obedience effect refers to a psychological phenomenon where, when faced with an authority figure who has legitimate status, professional background, or social recognition, people subconsciously give up their own judgment and choose to follow the authority's orders or suggestions. The classic study on this effect comes from social psychologist Stanley Milgram's 1961 shock experiment at Yale University. In the experiment, researchers recruited ordinary people to act as teachers and gave them the task of administering a memory test to a student, actually an experiment assistant, in the next room. Every time the student answered incorrectly, the teacher was told to press a button to deliver an electric shock, and the voltage was supposed to increase gradually from 15 volts to 450 volts. The label for that 450-volt setting clearly read danger, severe shock. As the voltage went up, screams and table banging came from the next room. Later, there was complete silence. When the teachers hesitated to continue, the experimenter, in the role of authority, wearing a white coat, would say in a calm but uncompromising tone, "Please continue." This is a necessary step for the experiment. The results were shocking. 65% of the teachers ended up pressing the 450-volt button, even though they personally thought they might have hurt a stranger. From a psychological perspective, the authority-obedience effect stems from the cognitive shortcuts and diffusion of responsibility that humans use to navigate a complex world. In unfamiliar or uncertain situations, people instinctively see authority as a stand-in for professional and correct. Following an authority's judgment not only reduces the cognitive burden of analyzing information and weighing pros and cons, but also lets people shift responsibility to the authority if something goes wrong, avoiding the pressure of being accountable for a bad decision. That's exactly what happened to you at the hospital. Faced with confusing medical jargon and unclear diagnoses, the doctor's title and qualifications became safety signals. You'd rather trust that professional endorsement than risk questioning it, even if your gut had the right answer. This psychological mechanism was originally a protective strategy formed during human evolution, but it often ends up swaying our choices without us noticing. The impact of the authority-obedience effect has seeped into many areas of life, and it's especially noticeable in medical settings. You might remember last year, when your mother went to the doctor for joint pain, she saw a veteran doctor who'd been in orthopedics for 30 years. He barely asked about her symptoms before prescribing a bunch of imported painkillers and physical therapy sessions, costs that were way over your budget. Looking at the prescription, you had doubts. Your mom had tried physical therapy at the community hospital before, and it hadn't helped much. Plus, the imported medicines label listed a bunch of side effects. But when you tried to ask a question, the old doctor just waved a hand. "I've treated hundreds of patients like your mom. This plan will definitely work." You lost your confidence right away and paid quietly. Later, your mom got nauseous from the medicine, so you switched to a younger doctor. That doctor suggested a joint ultrasound first, and finally diagnosed it as just a mild synovitis, something that got better with affordable medicine and rehabilitation exercises. The key here is that the old doctor's 30 years of experience became a symbol of authority. Even though his diagnosis was flawed, you chose to obey because of that seniority glow. Psychological studies show that when authorities display professional markers like titles, certificates, or years of experience, people's willingness to obey goes up by more than 30%, even if those markers don't have much to do with the current issue. The authority obedience effect is also common in the workplace. When you worked at a startup in the tech park, your department head was an industry expert who'd led the development of a well-known mobile OS. Last month, in a team meeting, he proposed cutting the personalized features that users had been praising and switching to developing a new module for enterprise clients. His reason: this is the main trend in the tech industry's future. Before the meeting, you'd analyzed the data carefully and found that the target user overlap for the new module was less than 10%, and the market was already dominated by several similar products. But when you were about to raise your hand to question it, you saw your colleagues in the meeting room all nodding in agreement. The department head was tapping the table lightly with his pen, his eyes scanning the room. Does anyone have a different opinion? You hesitated suddenly. He's a veteran in the industry. Maybe I missed some key info. In the end, you stayed silent. 3 months later, after the new module launched, user churn spiked, and the company had to urgently roll back the version. This is the suppression effect of authority. In hierarchical organizations, an authority status makes people feel self-doubt and herd mentality. Even if they spot a problem, they compromise for fear of being seen as challenging authority. This effect is even stronger in highly professional fields like investment banking and law firms, where young professionals often default to the boss's judgment is correct, even if there are obvious logical holes. In legal settings, the authority obedience effect can skew judgments of fairness. You once served as a juror in a theft trial. The defendant was a 20-year-old man accused of stealing a laptop from a mall. During the trial, a senior prosecutor in a crisp suit clearly cited provisions from the criminal law, showed surveillance footage, blurry, showing only a figure wearing a mask, and even called a criminal psychology expert to testify. The expert said the defendant's behavioral patterns matched those of a habitual thief. Sitting in the jury box, you had a lingering doubt. The height of the figure in the footage was about 5 centimeters different from the defendant's, and the defendant had provided preliminary evidence that he'd been at the library during the crime. But during the jury's discussion, one member said, "This prosecutor has handled cases for 20 years and never made a mistake." The others agreed, and you wavered too. After all, you knew nothing about legal provisions. The prosecutor's professional status seemed more convincing than the vague evidence. Luckily, a juror who was a retired judge raised questions, reorganized the evidence chain, and in the end, the jury acquitted the defendant. This experience confirms what psychologists call authority bias. When people lack knowledge in a field, they subconsciously take the authority's opinion as truth and ignore details that contradict the authority, even if those details could determine the final outcome. Even in everyday shopping, the authority obedience effect works quietly. Last year, when you were buying skincare products at a downtown department store, a salesperson held up a serum and enthusiastically explained, "This was co-developed by 3 dermatologists, won an international beauty award, and lots of famous celebrities use it." As she spoke, she pulled out a thick certificate with signatures from foreign doctors you'd never heard of, plus a few blurry photos of celebrities using the product. You'd originally only planned to buy an affordable moisturizer, but when you heard developed by doctors and endorsed by celebrities, you suddenly thought the product was more reliable. Doctors are authorities on skincare, and celebrities' choices can't be wrong, right? In the end, you spent 3 times your original budget on the set. When you got home and checked the ingredient list, you found its key ingredients were almost the same as the affordable moisturizer you'd used before, only with a few gimmicky additives. The authority here was actually a carefully packaged trick by the brand. Unfamiliar foreign doctor titles, vague celebrity connections. These are all marketing tactics that exploit the authority obedience effect. Psychological research shows that when a product is tied to authority symbols, consumers' willingness to buy it goes up by 40%, even if they can't verify whether those authorities are real. Of course, the authority obedience effect isn't all negative. At fire scenes, we instinctively follow firefighters' instructions to evacuate. When in a car accident, we follow traffic police's judgment to assign responsibility. When learning new knowledge, we respect teachers' professional explanations. These acts of obedience let us make correct choices quickly in complex or dangerous situations, reducing unnecessary risks. But the key is to learn to tell the difference between genuine authority and fake authority, and keep a healthy amount of critical thinking. Next time you get advice from an authority, you can ask yourself a few questions. Is their professional field directly related to the current issue? Is there objective evidence to support their opinion? If I disagree, do I have valid reasons to back it up? True rationality isn't blindly rejecting authority or unconditionally obeying it. It's respecting expertise while not losing your own judgment. When we learn to stay clear-headed in the face of authority, we can turn the authority-obedience effect into a tool to help us make decisions, not a chain that restricts our thinking. That's probably the real point of understanding this psychological phenomenon.